Welcome to Untapped, Knowledge for College, presented by the College Knowledge Foundation. Join us as we untap the world of college admissions, financial aid, and student life through collective wisdom and engaging conversations.
Yeah, I didn't know much about the whole new contributor thing. Just not having worked
It's
in financial aid, but like hearing
contributor.
the
Yeah.
FAFSA change, I'm like, so that's good to know that, it's not just the parent that it is. It is they're using the word contributor now, so it's not just a parent.
Yeah. Because we realize that the landscape and the definition has changed because the way families look have changed. And it's
Yeah,
not
there's
just
very
the
different.
nuclear, in the traditional sense, a
Hmm.
two set of parents, filing jointly household.
Sure.
So, we're certainly open to, and FAFSA has made accommodations for, parents who are separated, parents who are filing singly, parents who are filing in conjunction with other partners. So there's certainly that space to, and that was part of the redesign too. So it's part of that,
Hmm.
coming into this current age and then the higher education landscape. That was something that was very intentional, the way that those questions were redesigned. And the second thing I want to mention is that it is the free application for federal student aid. The number of students, I guess, probably isn't quite as low as you would think,
Uh-huh.
have actually paid, as you mentioned, for these services.
Yeah.
Um, and the design of the FAFSA is not so that it limits or places barriers for anybody. It's not something that is not intended to be completed by you as the student and a contributor, right?
Hmm.
It's free if you're paying for the FAFSA, if you're paying for somebody to complete it on your behalf, or if there's services that are provided. I would question the legitimacy, and some are certainly legitimate. And I don't mean to suggest that there are financial advisors or college preparedness advisors who are ill-intentioned out there, because that's certainly not the case. But
Hmm.
by and large, if you are finding yourself paying more than for the FAFSA than you might conceivably see in a scholarship or a grant,
Yeah, it's not.
that should be a red flag.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For sure.
yeah,
Yeah. But yeah, those, I've heard those horror stories of people when they have paid, and I'm like, no, that's not how it works. I wish you didn't,
yeah,
wish you hadn't have done that. But yeah,
yeah,
there are those things out there.
absolutely.
So earlier you talked about FIA. So can you just kind of explain kind of the difference between how that works when it comes to, kind of the differences between FAFSA and FIA when it comes to federal and state?
Yeah, so FIA is going to be the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency. So it's going to be pertinent for the students and families of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. FIA has also undergone some changes this year,
Hmm.
because we're in the midst of, we're sensing a trend here, right? There's a year of change. And to be honest, Donovan, we're probably looking at a lot of these changes and implications carrying forward at least into the next academic year. I talked a little
Sure.
earlier about, in a typical year, next month, October 1st, we're already encouraging students and families who are enrolled this semester in the fall to complete their applications for the upcoming school year.
Hmm.
So we've already seen a extension or a pushback of that timeline there. And FIA is no different. FIA is going to be a state grant that students are eligible for. They can see that on their financial aid. Because it's a grant, it does not have to be repaid. It would be dispersed into 2 semesters, fall and spring, much like other forms of financial aid would at many other colleges and universities. It is something that students would have to apply for every year.
Hmm.
FIA typically adheres to a May 1st filing deadline. This past year, it was June 1st. So it coincided with the recommended FAFSA filing date.
Gotcha.
Residents of Pennsylvania that filed the FAFSA by June 1st were eligible for the FIA grant. And they had to take an additional step this year that they didn't have to do previously. They had to go online. They had to complete what's called a Grant Us. So that's GRANTUS, a Grant Us account. And that would ultimately make it easier for tracking and dispersing of the grant aid itself.
Hmm.
This year currently, and I don't know by the time that this podcast episode airs, I'm hopeful that the grants from FIA would have dispersed. Typically, we see those usually right around this point of the semester, maybe a little bit earlier. This year, we're about 2 months behind. So FIA is going
Wow.
to be transmitting that information to schools, Penn State included, in the end of September. So we're planning on seeing that funding dispersed by mid-October, late October.
Okay.
Obviously, not what our families are too keen on
Hmm.
hearing. Not the message that me and my colleagues in financial aid are pleased to share. But it's a reality of what we're working with this year.
Yeah. So I definitely wanted to hit on that because the when it comes to getting money from the state, I find that's not something that students realize is available. Like they know what the FAFSA is, but they don't
Sure.
know that most of the time too. There's something that they can also submit for this for state aid also. So definitely wanted to bring that up.
State aid. And then there's the whole separate category, which we haven't really talked about so far, and that is that's external scholarships. That's external aid. It's
Yes.
forms of scholarships and grants, or forms of financial aid, excuse me, that you don't necessarily need to apply directly for from the school, that
Hmm.
are not tied to FAFSA, that are totally independent of any either of those things. And so those are agencies like or scholarship resources, scholarships.com,
Hmm.
fastweb.net. There's a database, which is I should know off the top of my head. It's a national database that students
Okay.
can they can go, and a lot of all the schools that I've worked for have this link directly through their financial aid websites. Basically, what
Yes.
Donovin is, it's a database that can go into. It's essentially a clearinghouse um, of scholarships. It acts as a repository, so students can go in. They could search their major, they could search their high school, they could see
Bunch
where
of
they're from, they
criteria.
could see what their level, undergraduate, graduate, terminal degrees,
Hmm.
full-time, part-time, so on and so forth, and it will return hits based on the criteria that they input. So that's insanely useful. So I always
Cool.
recommend that students consider those types of outside sources, and don't fall into the trap of the mindset that everybody's applying for it. I'm never going to get it. It's like something that my parents always told me, and something I tried to live by, is that don't think you're not going to get it because somebody has to. So
Yeah.
somebody
I
has
like
to
that.
get it.
Hmm.
So take the shot. I'm just going to recommend you take a couple hours a semester. It doesn't have to be more than
Hmm.
that, and just check in and see what's out there. And just speaking a little bit for the students that we service here in northeastern Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania in general, a lot of students don't realize that all the counties have county chambers and county seats and county
Yeah, that's so
resources.
true. Yeah.
So, like for instance, we work with a lot of students here at Penn State Scranton with Lackawanna County.
Hmm.
So there's the Lackawanna Foundation, and there are scholarships that are awarded just for students that are coming from the high schools and the
Yeah.
school districts in our area. So never discount those Chamber of Commerce's, because I know when I was 17, 18, I much less even understand fully what a Chamber of Commerce was, let alone that
It's
they
probably 2 years ago for me when I understood what
yeah,
a chamber
and
of
I'm gonna
commerce was, to
say
be
it was
honest.
probably not long beyond that. No, much later than it should have been. But totally, the point is that there are things that you don't realize that are, and that's not even counting things that you might realize, like high schools,
Hmm.
civic organizations. There might be some scholarships offered through employers, local and national
So
level.
much.
Banks,
Yeah.
credit agencies. So just be mindful of, what it is, what you're applying for, do your homework.
Hmm.
Just generally ask questions, I think is a really good take home message.
And I looking at scholarships as a whole, I always tell students there's scholarships out there for almost everything. Any and everything that you can think of, you can find a scholarship for. And so many times students do have that mindset that you mentioned, where they think about so many other people are applying for this, I'm not going to. And I tell students what's important to do is apply, because so many other people may have that mindset. And if yearly a company or an organization or a person is giving this money away, and you're
Yeah.
the only person who applies, there's no competition. So whether it's
Yeah.
$250, whether it's $2,500, like, you never know, but that continually adds up. So the more diligent you are about, taking some time and actually doing it, you
Yeah.
don't know how many other people are applying to it. And there's so many out there that you find these little ones where it's this little scholarship, but you found
Yeah.
10 of those and now you've got a semester paid for.
You have a semester, micro scholarships is
Yeah.
seeing an increase in micro scholarships, Donovan, which is exactly what you're describing. Scholarships that, and Raise Me, and Raise Me transfer
Mm-hmm.
scholarships come to mind too. So for our listeners out there who might be attending a community college or junior college at that level,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes there are scholarship funds in the Raise Me platform that's open specifically or eligible. They're specifically eligible for. I had a student who was in the other day, and he said, "Well, I have, it was almost your example to a T. It was, I
Mm-hmm.
have, a scholarship for this. I had a scholarship for that. It was like maybe 6 or 7 scholarships that were like $150 each, and you're
Yeah.
like, well, $150 is not really going to put a dent in the tuition bill, so to speak, or have an impact. But when you start to add things up, it absolutely can.
It definitely does.
Don't be afraid to put a little bit of time in, because it seriously can add up.
Yeah. And the FAFSA, that's something that can be, any student be able to fill that out, and goes to the different schools. You put in like the school code or select it on the form, and like that goes to the school. But then similarly, there's something that I actually learned about after leaving
Okay.
admissions, the CSS profile, which is something that I think about 300 or so schools will require you to submit, in addition to the FAFSA, or instead of, where it's literally just really only for scholarships. But
Yes,
certain schools will require students to submit the CSS profile, which I believe is on College Board's website, where you would
it
actually
is.
submit the
It is,
CSS profile.
and not every school, as you mentioned, when you consider how many colleges and universities exist out
Mm-hmm.
there, 300 is not a huge list. So if your school is on that list and it's something that you're strongly considering, definitely make sure you're doing some homework and be mindful of deadlines and make sure that everything's
Yes.
completed in its entirety, because that could be something that is preventing you from getting financial aid at one or multiple locations that you're applying
Mm-hmm.
to.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's something that I actually had a student tell me about this summer too. When I was speaking, I spoke with so many students this summer. I'm a part of the few different things that I went to present, and a student was telling me that based off of the CSS profile, like, they didn't really consider much of the FAFSA, because so
Yeah,
much of what he had submitted, like, it was just university scholarships that
yeah,
that he was going to be able to get. So, definitely, if there's something that you can submit, I can't stress it enough. I always tell students to submit it, because you just never know what impact that could have on getting something that was going to help you in the long run.
absolutely. Yeah.
So
And
when it comes, oh, go ahead.
no, something I was gonna, you go ahead. Ah.
So when it comes to, like, students have submitted whatever they need to submit, whether it's the FAFSA, the CSS profile, they've applied, they get that letter before, the May 1st deadline that most schools have, where you have to accept your offer of admission. They get that financial aid offer letter. What can students expect to kind of be on there when it comes to
Yeah.
university saying, okay, we've reviewed you, now here's a letter? Like, what does that letter look like?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and the short answer is it's going to probably look a little bit different for everyone. It's going to look different based on your school,
Mm-hmm.
not only in what you see, what you're eligible for. Some of that, again, is going to be universal. So if you're going to be qualifying for a direct loan, which is your student loan, you're almost entirely guaranteed to see that at every single school. If you're going to be qualifying for the FIA grant and you're
Mm-hmm.
a Pennsylvania resident, then you're going to probably see that, at whether you're at Westchester or Penn State or, King's College, wherever. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, But we want to be mindful of the differences in how that information is laid out to you, you know? Um, is it easy to interpret? Do I know what I'm looking at? You know, a lot of schools will list tuition, they'll list fees, they'll show you your tuition and fee structure, and they'll show you other things that you might be that might be pertinent to you, such as housing, if you're going to
Oh
be
yeah.
on campus versus, you know, commuting. And so that situation is obviously going to vary student to student. Some schools will require that you live on campus,
Hmm.
and they'll build that right into, you'll just see one lump sum as tuition, room, and board. So board generally being the housing option, and or excuse me, board being like a meal plan,
Hmm.
and you know, room being a housing option.
Yeah.
And others are going to show that in a dramatically different way. Some schools are going to overestimate unbillable expenses. So, for instance, they'll build in transportation, they'll build in miscellaneous fees, they'll build in a budget for course materials and other such expenses. And
Hmm.
a lot of that is going to be really useful if you know what you're looking for. It could help you budget. But when you're looking at a lot of those packages, those financial aid packages and award letters for the first time, I totally get how it could be so overwhelming, because, and
Yeah.
there are times where students will bring financial aid offers up to me from other institutions, and I'll have to take a close look at it just to know what exactly that vernacular is for that particular school. Um, but those are, generally speaking, things that students can see. They can see usually after students commit to attending institution, there are some extra steps that they'll have to go through in
Hmm.
order to procure some additional aid. So in many cases, students will have grants and scholarships automatically applied to their account. We mentioned a little bit earlier about that FIA and the Grant Us platform, so that is requiring that extra step that students take there before those funds are transmitted to institutions. So that's very important. But oftentimes, you know, students don't realize that they have to go in and they have to accept their student loans. They have
Yeah.
to fill out what's called a master promissory note, which is essentially an e-signature. You are letting the school know, and you're letting the government know, this is who I say I am, and I intend to make good on my promise to repay this loan.
Hmm.
And so there's also educational material that go along with that. There's something called loan entrance counseling, Donovan, which is it's essentially a tutorial that the government has students go through in order to fully procure that loan. So think of it kind of as you know, you're reading the fine print on the loan, so to speak, so that you understand what your responsibilities are as a borrower, and what exactly that means for you in the future.
Yeah, I love yeah, so much great information there. One of the things that you hit on, which I think it's important to talk a little bit more about, is having, people come to you and say, I've got this offer, kind of what does this mean? But when you have offers from different institutions, can you talk a little bit about how important it is to look at how much you're actually paying versus how much the school may be offering you?
Oh my goodness. And having worked for several different schools, private schools versus public school,
Yes.
I can tell you firsthand that it's a very different lens that you're viewing that through.
Uh-huh.
Generally speaking, and again, I don't want to make any generalizations. Generally, generalizations are not good. Generally speaking, private schools operate differently with financial aid than public schools do. Um, Generally speaking, private schools are able to do something that's called tuition discounting in a way that reduces the overall sticker cost, if you
Hmm.
will, of tuition relative to what public schools may be able to do, because public schools will start, generally speaking, at a lower price point with tuition. And generally speaking, public schools are subsidized in different ways through state and federal governments that private schools simply are not. And so that changes many of the ways that schools will operate, and the level of autonomy and in terms of decision making that schools can can do.
Sure.
So when a student is looking at a financial aid offer from school A, which may be private school, school B, which may be a public school, I always say, okay, let's talk about this in terms of real cost. If school A is going to be $60,000 a year, and that
Hmm.
includes everything. That includes room, board, tuition, you
Sure.
name it. And they're offering you a $30,000 scholarship, which is phenomenal, and you totally earned that. You worked hard for the grades. You made sure that you got your application in and time. You did everything right along the way, and so this scholarship is acknowledgement of that. Then you get school B, which is a public institution that maybe offered you $3,000,
Hmm.
and you're thinking, well, $3,000 is a lot different from $30,000.
Hmm.
And you don't have to be a math major, or even like remotely to do the calculus on that one,
There's
right?
a zero
And
missing.
there's a very right, there's a disparity there. And oftentimes students won't realize that, okay, I don't need to, and they'll get caught up on the perception that
Yes.
there is a perceived value there in school A, um, acknowledging my value, acknowledging my
Yeah.
worth. That simply isn't being recognized at school B. Somewhere along the lines, people will realize that school B starts at a lower price point. So while school A might be $60,000, school B is going to be $15,000.
Hmm.
And school A might be giving you that $30,000 scholarship, but at the end of the day, that's still bringing your balance down to $30,000 to go there.
Correct.
Whereas a $3,000 scholarship from school A that is $15,000 is $12,000 to attend there. So these are the types of ways that I would caution and encourage families to look at and have a
Very important to pay
conversation with a
attention to.
financial aid professional. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because there's perceived versus real costs. And if you don't think that there are not, and I'm not saying that school A in this scenario isn't going to be a phenomenal choice and a phenomenal right fit for many students, because it absolutely will be. And again, that's part of the beauty of what makes every school different and every student
Sure.
different. There's someplace out there for everybody. But I would caution students and families to be educated consumers and to ask the questions and to have somebody talk through it. And then oftentimes we get to this point in the conversation when you say, oh, well, Nick, I didn't realize I would be paying $30,000 versus $12,000, and I'm going to get the same degree. Again, generally
Yep.
speaking,
Yep.
kind of puts things in a different perspective.
Yeah. And I mean, to throw a little bit more into that, I now do corporate recruiting, and I've recruited for major companies. And the last thing that I'm looking for in a very quick scan of a resume is where you went to school. I feel
Yeah.
like so many people, they hang up on, well, I need to go here because it's going to look better. And very few times does that really work. And I tell students that works if, for instance, me as an alum of Penn State, if I see someone else went to Penn State, oh, okay, there's a connection there that you've made with that recruiter, that hiring manager. But
Mhm.
that's only if you went to the same school as that person. Otherwise, I could care less if you went to Harvard or community college and
Sure.
got your bachelor's or your your associate's degree. Or like
Sure.
there's so many misconceptions there. So glad that you mentioned a little bit of that. But like it's so important for students to look at like how much they're actually going to be paying and not really try to almost like pit the universities against each other, is how much your value is. Like certain
Yeah.
places, that the university that you were talking about, like if it's a private institution, they're giving you more money in a scholarship than your whole tuition would be from the other institution. So yeah,
Yeah.
that I feel it's just was so important to touch on, because I feel like that's definitely a struggle that people have at that time of the year when they're getting those financial aid offers from schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's clear for students, and sometimes, again, at the end of the day, it's our job as professionals to hopefully help educate.
Mm-hmm.
And I will just give a shameless plug for students that are thinking of saving costs, that families that are out there listening that are
Mm-hmm.
interested in saving costs, where that's certainly a consideration, and where they maybe see a 4-year degree at a certain type of institution as a barrier. Shameless shout out for our community institutions in the area,
Yeah.
and in the country as well, as truly being the unsung heroes of education. Oftentimes, they're able to provide phenomenal values
Yes.
at price points that, quite frankly, neither public nor private schools can
That
match.
they can't match.
And
Yeah.
right. And so we see a lot of students that will start at a community college and stay close to home and take courses that are fully vetted by 4-year, 2-year institutions for a fraction of the cost that transfer
Yep.
in seamlessly. And I bring this into the conversation, Donovan, because I would be remiss if I didn't talk about, again, being an educated consumer in terms of financial literacy and
Yeah.
understanding your options. You
Yes.
can't talk about financial aid or student aid without fully understanding that there are different ways to save money
Yes.
that will ultimately help you reach your goal.
Perfect. Love that. And then I've got one more question for you.
Yeah.
When would you suggest students start looking for like financial aid? Like at what stage would you say is perfect for a student to begin to look at financial aid options if they're considering, going to school, higher education after high school?
Yeah. No, that's a wonderful question. I think that you could ask that question to five different higher education professionals and probably get a number of different answers. I
Hmm.
suspect that most, if not all of us, will say the same thing. We'll give you a canned response like, hey, as soon as possible. Um, I would generally think that anytime students are considering starting the college search process is a good time to also be thinking mindfully and intentionally about financial aid. For most students that are in a traditional, 4-year high school setting, this kind of puts them around the end of their freshman year, start of sophomore year.
Sure.
And I always say, the more time you have, the better. And I think that holds true for the college search process. Generally speaking, I kind of tie that closely to the seriousness that students have, the intentionality in looking at certain schools. You want to cast your net wide. You want to look at as many schools as possible, or at least do your research, get your information on as many schools as possible, and then you kind of start to narrow that funnel a little bit. So you cast your net wide, and then you want to come in the further you move on into your high school career. I think for most students, sophomore year and junior year is when you'll start to get really serious. You've
Hmm.
identified, you've looked online, you've done some homework. At least you've checked out some websites, and you're starting to get an idea. Maybe you've attended some college visits,
Sure.
some open house programs. You talked to Donovan at a college fair, and he really, really wowed you. And you're like, I want to be just like Donovan when I grow up. And I find out where Donovan went to school and what Donovan studied, and I start thinking in terms of, how do I set myself up for success, and what do I need to do to get there. Um,
Yeah.
and I really think that the more educated our students and our families are collectively, the earlier, the better. And to start that process as early as possible. And to also make it a dialogue, make it a conversation. Whoever is going to be involved in that capacity, whether it's mom, dad, whether it is mom and supporting systems,
Hmm.
whether no parents are involved at all.
Yeah.
It just have a support network that maybe looks a little bit different
A little
than,
different. Hmm.
for other people. Start that dialogue as soon as possible.
Yeah. I mean, that's honestly, I would have given the same exact answer. Like, as soon as you start thinking about it, that's when the look, because it
Yeah.
may leave your mind at a certain point in time. But, one of the things that we have on our website, which I'll link in the description for this, is we have a scholarship tracker on our website. So students can start looking early and just kind of look at, okay, when's the open date for this scholarship? So
Yeah.
that's something that I'll definitely link in the description, along with a bunch of the things that we talked about when it came to the different scholarship websites and the studentaid.gov. Like, I'll definitely make sure to link all of those in the description, so students don't have too hard of a time to find those. But
Fantastic. You're doing good work,
I
my friend.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate all the information that that you were able to share. I know this episode, I was extremely excited to record because this is just such a topic where there's just so much to talk about. So I definitely will extend you the offer to come back, and hopefully we can have you back and dive deeper into
I
some of
can't
these
wait.
other
There's
topics.
so many things to talk about, and I know we just scratched the surface.
Perfect. Well, hey, I appreciate you again. Can't thank you enough for being here. That's it. That is so much. So hopefully you learned something from Nick today, and a little bit of me talking too. But that's another episode of Untapped Knowledge for College, and make sure you stay tuned because I definitely will have Nick back again to dive deeper into this great topic of financial aid. So Nick, thanks again, and can't wait to have you back.
Absolutely. Thank you, Donovan.
You got it.
Thanks for tuning in to Untapped Knowledge for College. Join us next time as we continue to untap the wisdom and guidance essential for success on your college journey. Follow us on Spotify or click the link in the description below to follow us on other platforms. Visit our website if you're interested in booking a session